What if Luffy was reborn with Joyboy's memories? How would the world government and Emu react? What would be Luffy's dream? Well, imagine this. It began when 7-year-old Luffy got lost in a forest that Garp threw him in. After hiking up a mountain, he came across this cave that intrigued him. Inside the cave, he found an ancient dial, half buried in the dark, roots grown through its carved grooves. He touched it, thinking it was some sort of food. The Void Century didn't arrive as facts. It arrived as flood, a war he hadn't fought, a promise he hadn't made, a silence stretched across centuries, all of it crashing into a mind built to hold a boyhood, not a history. Memory isn't data. It doesn't install. 800 years of grief and betrayal floods a 7-year-old the same way a fever breaks a body, and something on the other side of that fever is never quite the same again. He didn't scream. He went quiet instead, curled small on the cave floor, breathing in time with something that wasn't his own heartbeat. 3 days passed before Shanks found him. The pirate knelt in the dirt, searching a boy's face for the loud, grinning kid he'd left there. He found something older looking back at him instead. Luffy. Shanks's voice was careful. What happened to you? I know what you're protecting, Luffy said quietly. The hat. The dream under it. I know what it's supposed to cost to keep a promise like that. Shanks went still. Whatever he'd expected to hear, it wasn't that. He set the straw hat on Luffy's head anyway, hand lingering a moment too long. Grow up and give it back to me, he said, the old grin trying and failing to reach his eyes. For the first time since he'd met the boy, Shanks looked at him the way you'd look at something you were afraid you couldn't protect anymore. Ace and Sabo noticed the change before Luffy ever explained it. Quieter, watching things a 7-year-old shouldn't watch. You've been weird since the cave, Ace said, poking the fire with a stick. You gonna tell us what happened? Or just keep being creepy about it? Luffy thought about lying. He thought about telling them everything instead. The war, the silence, the promise. Both felt wrong the second he considered them. I know things, he said finally. Old things. I'm not gonna dump them on you. But I can teach you how to listen the way I had to learn. Listen to what? Everything. The wind before it moves, a punch before it lands. Luffy pressed a fist to his own chest. It's called the breath of all things. I'll show you. Not tell you why. Show you. Sabo leaned forward, curious despite himself. Ace rolled his eyes but didn't leave. They trained in fragments after that, small, unexplained drills that left both older boys frustrated and, slowly, sharper than they had any right to be. It was weeks later, mid-drill, that something in Luffy went cold and distant, his breath catching wrong. Luffy? Sabo's voice, worried. Luffy didn't answer right away. Somewhere at the edges of a sense he couldn't name yet, he'd felt something. Sabo. Hurt. Then gone. Then, impossibly still breathing somewhere far from here. A feeling with no proof behind it, nothing he could carry to Dadan, nothing that could reach whatever nobility house might be hiding a boy nobody in this forest had the reach to find. Nothing, Luffy said, voice tight. Just stay close today. Both of you. Neither of them understood why he grabbed their wrists that afternoon and refused to let go for hours. Holding on like letting go might cost him something he had no way yet to get back. 10 years of Garp's fists built the vessel for a mind that had been ready since he was 7. At 17, Luffy set sail, not chasing adventure for its own sake, but looking for his wings, and for a promise Joyboy had left unfinished centuries before either of them existed. Zoro's swords were already drawn when Luffy found him tied to a marine base post, humiliated, waiting to die on his own terms rather than someone else's. You're not fighting for bounty hunting anymore, Luffy said before Zoro could get a word out. You're fighting because somebody made you promise something you can't take back. A girl. A grave. Am I close? Zoro's eyes narrowed, sharp with something between anger and disbelief. Who told you that? Nobody told me. I just know how to listen. Luffy cut the ropes. Join me. I'll get you strong enough to actually keep that promise. He didn't wait for an answer that day. He didn't need to. Nami's wound was easier to name and harder to say out loud. A village bought back 1 coin at a time from a monster wearing kindness like a mask. Luffy told her what she already knew and had never let anyone say plainly, that the debt wasn't hers to carry alone anymore. She joined bitter and unconvinced, the way people do when hope has burned them before. Sanji's was simplest of all, a promise made over a dying man's fire, all blue burning behind his eyes since before he had words for wanting it. By the time they reached Zoro's overdue reckoning with the world's strongest swordsman, Luffy had already taught him just enough. Not victory, not yet, just the sliver of haki needed to crack Mihawk's suffocating presence instead of drowning in it. Zoro lost. He lost on his feet, blade raised, refusing collapse, and Mihawk's respect landed on him anyway, the way it never had in a version of this story where the fight had simply been unwinnable. None of them noticed the Marine officer watching from the tree line days later, radio pressed to his ear, voice clipped and businesslike. Reassigning, Smoker said. Belay pursuit. New orders. Track, log, report. Nothing more. This is the quiet tier of the Gorosei's escalation curve. No arrests, no confrontation, just paperwork moving somewhere Luffy will never see it. The first thread in a file that's only going to get thicker. The Going Merry cleared the Reverse Mountain current at Reverse Mountain days later, sails full, crew laughing. None of them aware a Marine intelligence file already had their names in it, growing heavier with every mile the Grand Line pulled them forward. Alubarna's rebellion was already tearing itself apart when Robin found a quiet corner of the palace to ask the question she'd been carrying for 20 years. You know things you shouldn't, she said, arms folded, testing him the way she tested everyone before they inevitably disappointed her. Everyone who's ever known things about me has wanted to use it. What do you want? Nothing you're not already carrying, Luffy said. You spent your whole life being told Ohara's research was a lie worth burning a city for. I know it wasn't. I've seen the truth. It was chasing. I'm not asking you to trust me. I'm telling you you're not crazy, and you never were. Robin went very still. Say something only someone who'd actually seen the Void Century would know, Luffy told her. Not everything. Just enough. A fragment of a promise made to people beneath the waves centuries before either of them existed. Something no fabricated intelligence file could have handed him. Something in Robin's face broke open, quiet and unguarded, for the first time in longer than she could remember. A living poneglyph, she murmured, almost to herself. That's what you are. Guess so. Luffy grinned. Want to come find out what else I know? She joined that night, not out of desperation, but recognition. The first time in 20 years someone had confirmed her life's work instead of asking her to hide it. Crocodile met his end differently than the version history would have written. Luffy didn't need a stretch punch duel or seawater tricks. He read the old warlord's every intent a half-second before it moved. Observation haki, sharpened by a decade Garp had spent trying to beat sense into him, and answered with Ryuo, a technique pulled whole from a memory fragment of Void Century combat, striking not flesh, but will, dropping Crocodile from the inside before his body ever registered the blow landing. Alubarna's people wept in the streets that night. A kingdom saved with less blood than history remembered. Somewhere far above them, in a room the sunlight never quite reached, a single report crossed a desk marked for eyes far above Marine HQ. Robin joining willingly is the loudest signal this timeline has produced yet. Proof the Ohara problem never actually ended. It just went quiet for 20 years. They didn't ride the knock-up stream for gold this time. There's a bell up there, Luffy told the crew, watching clouds swallow the mast overhead. It's not treasure. It's proof. I need to hear what it says. Skypia's golden ruins glittered under a sun that felt too close, and Enel met them with the same arrogance he'd have shown anyone foolish enough to climb this high. A god doesn't kneel to trespassers, Enel said, lightning gathering lazy around his shoulders. You're not a god. Luffy didn't raise his voice. You're just loud. Enel's bolt came fast, arrogant, certain. Luffy was already somewhere else by the time it landed. Observation haki reading the strike before Enel's own muscles had finished deciding to throw it, the same sense that had once shown him a brother's death and left him powerless to stop it. This time, it showed him everything, and he was ready for all of it. You should be dead, Enel said, confusion creeping into his voice for the first time in 1,000 years of never needing to feel it. You should be embarrassed, Luffy said, and closed the distance. There was no long, grinding survival story this time, no 100 million volts absorbed at the edge of collapse. Just a boy reading a false god's every intention like a parent watching a child's tantrum build before it happens, and ending it before it could properly begin. Enel hit the ground human, stunned, humiliated, the fight over almost before the crew had finished holding their breath. The golden bell rang once, deep and old, and the sound it carried wasn't gold at all. This is what the crew doesn't fully understand yet. That sound is confirmation. Somewhere below, buried and waiting, an ancient weapon is real and reachable, and no longer a rumor anyone can dismiss. Luffy stood beneath the ringing bronze a long moment, something old and grim settling behind his eyes. "Water 7 next," he said quietly. "There's a shipwright down there who doesn't know yet what he's about to build." Robin walked into the sea alone, mouthing words no one else understood, and the crew's grief lasted exactly as long as it took Luffy to lay out a plan instead of a rescue. "CP9 fights Rokushiki," he said, sketching the compound's layout in the sand with a stick, precise in a way that unsettled even Zoro. 6 techniques, 6 weaknesses. I know all of them. We're not storming this place. We're taking it apart. Sanji frowned. "How do you know the layout of a government fortress you've never set foot in?" "Same way I know everything else." Luffy's voice didn't invite a follow-up question. Enies Lobby's gates fell in a systematic collapse rather than a desperate brawl, Usopp's shots landing exactly where Luffy's warnings put them, Frankie's fists breaking exactly the doors Luffy said would break. The whole compound coming apart like a machine fed the wrong instructions. It was against Lucci, cornered, breathing hard, that something in Luffy's memory finally surfaced whole instead of in fragments, a technique from Joyboy's own war, blood pumped hot and fast through a body pushed past its limits. "Gear 2nd, Luffy said, almost to himself, steam hissing off his skin as pink lines spread beneath it. "I remember this." He closed the gap before Lucci's Soru finished registering the threat, and the fight that followed wasn't close. Robin was freed. The flag came down over the gate, deliberate, a message instead of a dare. Marine casualties scattered across the compound in numbers this timeline's history would remember very differently. This is the exact moment the Gorosei stop trying to manage the problem and start trying to bury it. A systematic dismantling of a government fortress reads nothing like a lucky rookie's rescue mission. Garp found them at the border of the sea, marine coat heavy on his shoulders, expression unreadable. "You're supposed to be under arrest, brat. You gonna be the one who does it?" Luffy asked, tired, unafraid. Garp studied him a long moment. A boy who somehow already carried the weight of a war Garp himself had spent a lifetime pretending wasn't coming. "True justice," Garp said slowly, testing the words like they'd changed shape in his mouth, "was never supposed to look like Ohara. Wasn't supposed to look like whatever's about to happen to you either. Then, don't let it." Garp didn't answer that directly. He turned instead, waving his men back with a single gesture nobody dared question. "Get out of here," he said, voice rough, "before I remember what my orders are." Something in his loyalty cracked that day, quiet and permanent, long before anyone would ask him to choose a side out loud. Word reached the Sunny before Ace's ship ever crossed their path. A feeling first, cold and formless, the kind Luffy had learned never to ignore. "Something's coming for you," Luffy told him, the moment they met on open water. "I don't know what it is. I don't know where. I've never felt anything like it before." Ace raised an eyebrow, half amused despite the weight in his brother's voice. "You've known everything since we were kids. Now you don't know something?" "That's the problem." Luffy's hands were shaking, and it wasn't fear of a fight. "Everything I carry because it has a will to be heard. This doesn't. It's just absence, a hole where a person should be." This isn't Luffy's knowledge failing by accident. His whole gift is built on hearing what wants to be heard, something that erases other people's power, other people's voices. Was never going to show up on that map, and that gap is the whole tragedy of what happens next. Ace's jaw tightened. 2 years of proving himself against a name he refused to be defined by, Roger's blood, a mistake the world wanted erased, had left him with exactly one response to a vague warning. "I've got a man to catch," he said. "A vague feeling isn't going to stop me." "Ace, I'm not you, Luffy. I don't get to know things before they happen. I just have to go find out." He was already turning, already gone in his heart before his ship pulled away. "I'll be fine." He wasn't. Word came back weeks later, brutal and final. Banaro Island, a duel lost to a man whose fruit swallowed devil fruits and hockey alike, a brother handed to the Marines in chains. Luffy didn't rage. He went very quiet instead, the same quiet that had swallowed him whole in a cave a decade before. Then came the second blow. The execution moved, quietly, deliberately, not to Marineford's public bay, but somewhere the world would never get to watch. "Mary Geoise," Luffy said, reading the intercepted orders with something colder than grief now settling into his voice. "They're not doing this to punish Ace. They're doing it so nobody sees me show up." He didn't waste the next hour on mourning. He spent it calling in debts Joyboy's memory had told him were owed for 800 years. Giants waiting on Elbaf, fishmen who remembered a promise better than any human ever could. The Grand Fleet gathered faster, and with far more legitimacy than history had ever given it before. Mary Geoise's white walls had never been breached in 800 years, and the fleet gathered off its coast made it clear that record was about to end. Giants from Elbaf waded through the shallows like walking mountains. Fishmen surfaced in formations older than any coalition the world government had ever accounted for. Behind them, the Sunny cut through the water carrying a crew that no longer looked like rookies to anyone watching from the Holy Land's towers. Sengoku's voice cracked across the defense lines, ordering every admiral available to the walls at once. Kizaru arrived first, mild and curious as ever. "Quite the guest list you've brought. Boy, should I be flattered or worried?" "Neither," Luffy said. "Just get out of my way." He didn't fight like a rookie punching above his weight. He fought like something the admirals had no category for. Observation haki reading Kizaru's light a half-second before it moved. Armament hardened by a decade of Garp's fists into something that no longer flinched from an admiral's strength. Every motion carrying the unhurried certainty of a man who'd inherited someone else's war and finally understood exactly what it had cost. This isn't a power spike. This is a decade of training arriving all at once, in front of the one audience that had never once had to take Luffy seriously before today. "You're not fighting like a pirate," Kizaru said, genuinely startled for the first time in longer than he could remember. "You're fighting like something older." "I am something older," Luffy said. "You just never bothered to check." Akainu came next, magma boiling at his fists, contempt plain on his face. "The successor of the void," he spat, like the words themselves were an insult. "A myth wearing a child's face." "Not a myth," Luffy said. "A debt somebody left unpaid. I'm just here to collect." The battle around them tore the Holy Land apart in pieces, giants trading blows with marine battleships, fishmen holding lines no admiral could break without cost, the crew fighting with the disciplined precision of people who'd trained for this exact war since childhood without ever knowing its name. Then, the drums started. Not cannon fire. Not war horns. A rhythm older than the Holy Land itself, rising out of the ground beneath Luffy's feet like something remembering how to breathe. The same sound Joyboy had once heard 800 years before either of them existed. Sengoku's face went the color of old paper. He knew that sound. He'd read about it in files, buried deeper than most admirals were cleared to access. He couldn't finish the sentence. Luffy's hair started turning white. Not from power alone, from memory finally closing the last gap between what he'd carried since he was 7 and what his body had spent a decade becoming strong enough to hold. The sun god's rhythm answered a boy who'd never once, in 10 years, stopped listening for it. The ground cracked beneath him as the transformation took hold, the whole battlefield's attention turning at once toward a boy who was no longer only a boy, and the platform where Ace waited, chained, still had no idea what was coming for it. White hair. Rubber skin gone the color of old bone. The battlefield's physics bent around Luffy like the world itself had decided to listen to him for the first time. He crossed the distance to the platform in a single bounce, laughing with none of his old carelessness in it, laughing the way you laugh when a decade of grief finally has somewhere to go. Ace looked up from his chains, disbelief plain on a face too exhausted to hide it. Luffy, not yet. Luffy's hand closed around the chains and they came apart like wet paper. "First, I've got something to say." He turned toward the 5 hooded figures watching from the Holy Land's highest balcony, and the whole battlefield, marines, giants, fishmen, admirals, went still enough to hear him. "I know what you were 800 years ago," Luffy said, voice carrying strange and vast, arriving from every direction at once the way Joyboy's memory had always carried inside him. "I know the name's history was never allowed to keep. I know what you buried, and who you buried it under." This is the first time in the whole story Luffy's inherited knowledge is used as a weapon on its own. Not fists, not haki, just the unbearable weight of a truth 800 years old. Spoken out loud where the whole world can hear it. One of the elders leaned forward. "You have no right to that history, boy. I'm not asking for the right." Luffy's white hair caught the light strangely. "I'm giving it back." He said the names. Not shouted, said, plainly, the way you'd read a list of the dead at a funeral nobody had ever been allowed to hold. Rank-and-file Marines near the platform lowered their weapons one by one, some in horror, some in a grief they didn't have words for yet, none of them able to keep fighting under the weight of what they'd just heard confirmed out loud. Sengoku didn't order them back into position. He simply stood there, hands empty at his sides, staring at a truth he'd spent his whole career refusing to look at directly. It was in the chaos of that stillness that Whitebeard's fleet broke through the outer wall. The old man didn't come to fight the war. He came to guarantee it ended. "Go," Whitebeard told Ace, voice rough with an illness that had nothing left to hide behind. "Both of you, get everyone out." "Pops, I'm not asking, boy." His Biseno came down against the Holy Land's ancient foundation stones, once, with the last of a strength that had leveled Marineford in another version of this story. The ground beneath the entire fortress groaned, cracks spreading outward from where centuries of stolen history had been built to look permanent. "Let the whole thing come down with me. Let them rebuild it on something true this time, if they've got the stomach for it." He struck the foundation a second time, and Mary Geoise's ancient stones began to fall, not from an enemy's fist, but from a captain choosing, with the last of his strength, exactly how his story would end. Whitebeard died, standing amid the collapse, unwounded on his back. A war's ending rewritten in every direction except the one that mattered least, the ending he'd already decided for himself, long before any of them arrived. Luffy carried Ace off the wreckage himself, white hair fading back to black, a truth finally spoken that the whole world could never fully unhear again. The Sunny drifted quiet in open water, Mary Geoise's smoke still visible on the horizon behind them, and for the first time in 10 years, Luffy didn't feel like he was carrying anything alone. He'd laid pieces of parchment across the deck, fragments of memory finally given shape, Joyboy's scattered recollections assembled into something that looked, for the first time, like an actual map. Not prophecy, not burden, just a bridge between what had been buried and what still needed finding. Ace sat beside him, quiet, healing, alive, in a way this story had never guaranteed him. "You've been carrying this since you were 7, Ace said finally. "All of it. Alone. Not anymore." Luffy looked up at his brother, then past him, at the rest of the crew scattered across the deck. Zoro sharpening a blade he'd earned the hard way, Robin reading names off the parchment with something like peace on her face, Nami charting a course toward whatever came next. "I've got people now who can carry pieces of it with me." Sengoku's Marines were still picking through Mary Geoise's rubble somewhere behind them. The Gorosei's authority hadn't shattered outright, but it had cracked in front of the whole world, publicly, permanently, in a way no army would ever be able to fully repair. "So what now?" Ace asked. "Now we keep going." Luffy rolled the map up carefully, tucking it away like something precious. "I didn't just inherit a promise, Ace. I inherited a chance to actually finish it." The Sunny turned toward open water, sails catching a wind that felt for once like it was blowing somewhere on purpose. Luffy didn't become Joyboy that day. He became something the world had never needed a myth for. The bridge between a stolen past and whatever future still had a chance to be built on top of it. The real war had only just begun.